Vince, let's get ready to rock and roll on this. And to kick the first part of the episode off, we're going to talk about sort of sophomore surges. And every year we see this, right? We see sophomores do one of two things. One is some fresh sophomore who was, pretty good as a freshman really takes a leap as a player that next year. We saw that with Robert Hainsey, for example, recently. When his second year going from just a good rotation starter, started but not really a full-time guy. Second year in 2018. Really saw his game jump. See guys that were really just backups, didn't play much, become really key regular rotation players. We saw that with Cole Kmet, for example, who didn't play much in 2017, then became a really important part of the tight end rotation in 2018 before his breakout as a junior. Then we see guys like what we saw last year with Kyron Williams, guys who are either backups or don't play much, who just break out completely. And the reality is the sophomore class every year is important, and I think it's going to be very important to this Notre Dame football team, and it's really going to affect them on all three levels. There's going to be at least one sophomore that needs to step up and become a star, right? There's another sophomore that needs to become a playmaker, like a big-time playmaker, and maybe two. And then there's some other sophomores that are going to play really important rotation roles or backup roles or potentially battling veteran players for starting jobs. Yeah. Right? Or potentially being in position to step in if a player with an injury history struggles. So we're going to deal with all of that today because I think this sophomore class, Vince, hits all those notes. And the player that we're going to start off with first, as we look at the sophomore class, the first player to me that stands out as someone who has to have a big year for Notre Dame is tight end Michael Mayer.
Yes.
Vince, I think when you look at Michael Mayer, they can't afford for him to have any kind of sophomore slump. For this Notre Dame offense to reach its full potential, yes, there are other good tight ends on the roster, but Vince, they need Michael Mayer at his best because we've talked a lot about, is there an alpha receiver? Well, he can be that guy. He needs to be that guy, and Notre Dame needs him to not just repeat what he did last year, but take his game to another level.
Well, you said it. I mean, we've talked about Michael Mayer being the alpha in the receiving game, and with an inexperienced wide receiving core, and we're going to touch on the wide receiving core today a little bit, but with an inexperienced overall receiving core, you've got a kid who his freshman year, he's coming back for his sophomore year, he might be the alpha, and he's going to need to step up in order to create the matchups that we believe can be beneficial to this offense, right? So if I'm a defensive coordinator going into the Florida State game, the Toledo game, the Purdue game, we'll say the first three games of the season, I got to stop 87. Stop 87. We talked about it. When you're a coordinator, you look at the other side of the ball, you figure out who do I need to stop. It's going to be 23 and 87 to start things off, right? I mean, if it's not, then they're not doing their job, right? So not only does Michael Mayer need to demand that kind of attention coming out of the gate, right? He's going to have to make plays and he's going to have to do things to continue to demand that, but that's going to open up everything else for other people. And so that's why I think it's so important, because I think his success leads to overall offensive success for the way in which we see this offense humming along to the best of its ability. Now, where I really want to see him step up, look, we know he can catch the ball. We know he can run safeties over. We know that he can drag 10 guys with him if he needs to. I want to see him take another step in the run game department when he's attached, his blocking, things of that nature. Now, I'm not saying he did a bad job for a true freshman, but now he's had a full year with Matt Bayless. It's time to step it up to that next level. That's where I would like to see him kind of take that next step.
For me, Vince, it's more about usage than necessarily Michael taking another step forward. I think every player needs to continue to improve.
Sure, absolutely.
I think Michael, obviously, there are things that you're going to expect to see him do as a sophomore. As you mentioned, another year in the weight room is going to help him. Yes, he was advanced for a freshman, but he was still a freshman. He's going to get a little stronger. His technique is really the thing to me that needs to continue to improve. Technique, you know what? Let me take that back. I think his technique was sound. I don't think he necessarily understood or was able to play with the angles and the leverage that you need to be successful. Which means, hey, look, I'm down blocking here. I got to make sure that I go on the right angle to make sure he doesn't go over top of me or underneath me, depending on what the blocking scheme is. Sometimes if a guy wants to go underneath you, that's fine. If you're running outside zone to your side and this guy wants to go inside of me, that's fine. I'm going to seal him off. We're out the gate, right? But What I can't do is if we're running a certain play, let this guy get over top of me because that's where we're trying to go. Just things like that, which are experiential things that he's going to have to improve upon. But the bigger thing for me as far as his specific improvement is just, he was a pretty advanced route runner for a freshman, but now he needs to become not a 4A. The whole 4A young guy thing needs to be eliminated from the vocabulary when we're discussing Michael Mayer. And so being more advanced as a route runner, being able to do a little better job at his top ends. You don't always want to just have to use your size and ball skills to thrive. You want to be able to gain a little bit of distance and separation on some of the more vertical routes. But at the end of the day, Vince, that's the big thing for me that needs to change with Michael Mayer this year, and it has nothing to do with him. It's how is he used. Last year, Notre Dame rarely threw him the ball beyond 10, 12 yards down the field, right? And I think according to Pro Football Focus, the one thing they still do a good job of is data collection. And they had him just getting 2 attempts all year up at 20 yards or beyond. Now, I don't actually criticize that, Vince, because the nature of the offense, the kind of quarterback you had who didn't necessarily like going vertically down the field, and Michael Mayer is a freshman. So it fit with what they were trying to do. They wanted to use him as an underneath chain mover, and he was very good at that. So no quarrels with how they used him last year. Okay. Right. They had Tommy Tremble. They had other options, but this is a different offense. You don't have the big outside receivers anymore that you could basically use as de facto tight ends, right? Now in this offense, he needs to be more of a guy that can attack the intermediate and deep parts of the field, the play side seams, the backside seams, the deep drags, the straight post routes, the wheel routes. There need to be things where he is used that way. And that is when we talk about taking pressure off other teams. If he's used the same way he was last year, that doesn't necessarily put the defense in tough spots. Not the way that it would if he's going to be used in a more all over the field type of way, Vince, because if it's just short and underneath stuff, you can just say to have your linebackers, they just keep this guy in front of you, but we're still going to be able to protect against Braden Lindsey and protect against Lawrence Keys and Kevin Austin and those type of players on the perimeter outside stuff. Michael has to be a threat to attack vertically in different concepts. That doesn't mean straight go routes. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. The other part that I'm interested in, Vince, is what they used him as a tight end last year only. And that was smart. Again, you don't want to put more on his plate than he can handle. This year, I want to see him move around more. I think that when you talked about teams having to key on him, if they're doing that and you're just leaving him as a tight end all the time, it makes it a little easier to defend him. So I think that's the other thing that I want to see, Vince, is using him all over the field more, not just on new routes, but new routes from new alignments.
Well, and we didn't get an opportunity, obviously, to see Michael Mayer in the spring game. And so we didn't see him moving him around. And again, they're not going to put everything out there in the spring game. It's readily accessible to everybody. But what we did see in the spring game, even though it was to a different human, it was tilted to the tight end position, were some throws down the seam, right, where they were working the middle of the field. And that gives me hope. That gives me optimism that is going to be a good part. I was going to say a large part, but a good part of their offense. And you're right. That was a piece that was missing last year. And again, that's not necessarily a criticism. You can call that route all you want.
To me, it's not a criticism at all. I mean, to me, it would have been right. I mean, not only that, but how much do you really want to put on Michael Mayer's plate in his first year? Right? Sure. I think the thing that John McNulty and Tommy Rees did a great job of last year is it wasn't like Michael only had 2 routes. I'm not saying he had a really simple job, but what I'm saying is that I do think they kept his usage in a relatively confined area and on how he was used and different things that he did, because I think that's what was needed in order to get him playing at a high level. That's good coaching, right? Sure. So for me, it's not a criticism at all. And then to your point, you have to know your quarterback. You have to know that you have a quarterback that wants to attack down the field. And, I thought that Ian Book had turned a little bit of a corner early on in the 2019 season when we saw him against Georgia. And I thought he was really effective in those roles. I mean, in that game, tacking down the seams and going to Cole Kmet and those kind of things. But then as the season wore on, we saw him do that less and less and less and less. And then, to where in 2020, it was basically eliminated from the offense, basically.
Yeah.
And so those are some things that I want to see more of with Michael Mayer is, obviously using him over the middle, but when Tommy Rees was a quarterback at Notre Dame, he had a tight end that played all over the field. And I don't think Michael Mayer and Tyler Eifert have identical skill sets at all. I don't. But I do think Michael Mayer can do enough to where you can put him backside and see how the defense is going to defend him.
Sure.
And say, hey, look, if you're just going to put a cornerback there, then we think we can use our personnel in other areas to create some matchup advantages. If you want to put a linebacker out there on him or a safety out there on him, it gives us some advantages there. For example, let's say a team has a really good cover player, okay, at linebacker, a Jeremiah Owusu type or something like that, or a Drew Tranquil type of player. And they're going to say, well, we're going to put that guy outside and we're going to cover Michael Mayer, right? Thinking that they're got some like great advantage. Well, if you're Notre Dame, you're like, great, because you just took one of your linebackers completely out of the box. And especially as much as Notre Dame does 2 tight end stuff, I think that's something that can play to their advantage because Notre Dame can then still have a second tight end on the field and they can still go run game stuff, but then they can still go trips, Vince, because they can put a running back out there. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yep.
And they could put the 2 tight ends backside, and they could go empty with trips and 2 tight ends backside. I mean, there's so many different things that they can do out of that personnel grouping. But if your tight ends are basically used the way that they were last year, which is basically from slots on in, then it does limit you a little bit. And that's where, like I said, I want to see Michael Mayer used a little bit more effectively maybe than he was this past season. So I think that's something that I'd like to see as well.